So here I am with my basic level set up, and you can see it's nothing too complicated, just enough to continue following along with these tutorials. And I recommend at this stage that you don't go crazy setting up a super complex level. What you want to do is follow along with the rest of the tutorials, and then once you've mastered everything that we've taught here, then go ahead and actually start creating your level design and putting some real thought into each one of your levels. Now, before I move on with this tutorial, I'd like to point something out that's really important, and I'm going to point it out again later in another video because it's just that important. You'll notice at the bottom right-hand side of my screen here, or left-hand side I should say, I'm sorry, we have our camera bounding box, this little white line that you can see here. And this is all the way at its original position, which is the bottom left. Now, I don't want you to move your camera's start position, and the reason for that is in a later tutorial we're going to talk about the score and how it follows along. And if you move your camera's start position by clicking on this button up here and move it to another location in your level, then you're going to run into trouble with the score system that we set up later on. So I can't stress that enough. Make sure that you don't move your camera and that it is located all the way at the bottom left of your level, its original start position. And if you did move it, just go ahead and click these buttons that you see up here to adjust the camera start position and put it back to where it originated from. Now, you might say, well, my camera isn't in the same place as my hero or my agent. Well, that's not a problem because in the last video we added the control camera behavior to our agent. So even though the start position of our camera is in the wrong location, it'll automatically jump to our agent's location, as we can see here when I press the play button. So our camera instantly moves to where our agent is located, so that's not a problem. So again, I think I've made that incredibly clear, but it's just that important. Make sure your camera is at the bottom left-hand side of your screen. So you can see that our agent is controlling the camera, and we've set up our movement, our collisions, and I've built in these interesting gaps here in the level. And what I want to do is come up with an interesting way for my agent to kind of jump across the gap. Now, we're not going to build in a jump behavior into our agent in this tutorial, but what we're going to do is use something like a portal to teleport our agent from one location to another location in the level. So let's get started with setting up that portal. So again, I'm going to go back to my media tab here, so I'll click on that. And I'm going to scroll down to where I see that portal image. So you can see we have this portal image right here. I'm just going to click and drag and drop that onto our actor tab. Now make very sure that you don't drop that on top of one of these images here or one of these actors, because it'll swap out the image. So you just want to drop that into an empty area, and then you can see that our portal has been added. As always, I'm going to rename this. So we'll rename it Portal. And for now, even though we're not going to put an actual portal right here, I'm going to put one right there while we're just programming it and making it look pretty so we don't have to travel to the portal's location. So just put it close to your main actor right now so that when you press play, you're close enough to it so we don't have to navigate around. So before we get into the whole beaming our agent from one location to another, we want to make this look a little bit more interesting. And a very quick and easy way of doing that is by adding some particles to our portal. So I'm going to back up and then click on the portal image, or portal actor I should say. And then of course we want our backstage open, so if you don't have it open, click on the toggle backstage button. And we know we're inside the portal actor because we have it selected. And again, we can click on this box here to now add in some behaviors. So I'm going to start typing the word particles and select that from the list here. And you can see that that adds the particle behavior to this portal actor that we added to our scene. Now, before we change any of these values, let's go ahead and preview this and see what it looks like. So you can see we get this white little dot showing up here. Now these are actually particles. It doesn't look like what you would expect particles to look like, but what's happening is at the very center of this portal actor, this blue thing you see here, we are generating a particle right there. And that particle is essentially being born every few seconds, and then it's traveling to the right, and then it's essentially dying. after a certain amount of time. So once we start making adjustments, you're going to see how this makes a lot more sense. So let's start looking at some of the attributes that we have here. We're not going to work with the first tab here, spawn rate. We'll leave all of this the same. But let's click on the velocity and position tab for our particles. So I'll click on that. And you notice we have an option here that says in the direction. And you can see that that wheel is pointing to the direction that the particles were actually moving in. Well, we want our particles to move up. So I'm just going to grab that wheel and drag it up, or you can just type in 90 degrees here. So at this point, now that I've made that change, I'm going to go ahead and preview my game again. And you can see now, instead of moving to the right, those particles are actually moving upward, which is exactly what we want them to do. Now, again, we notice that they are being created at the very center of that portal image. So I want to show you how you can offset their spawn point or their creation point. So if we take a look here again, we have already affected our position, but we have an emit offset. Now this first box here represents the X position, and this second box here represents the Y position. Now, if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about when I say things like X position and Y position, all you need to know is that X has to do with left and right, or horizontal, and Y has to do with up and down, or vertical. So for instance, if I wanted to take these particles and offset them in a negative X position, it would be to the left of the center point here. If I wanted to offset them in a positive X position, then it would be to the right of the center point of this portal. And if I, of course, wanted to offset them up, I could make it a positive Y, or down a negative Y. So if that doesn't make sense, don't worry. Let's just go ahead and change things right now so you can see how that works. So again, for right now, you notice that the particles are showing up in the very center of this portal. So we have 0, 0 in X and Y. If I were to take the X position and make it something like, let's say, negative 50, and then preview this, let's see what happens. So you can see now, instead of showing up in the center of my portal, my particles are all the way 50 pixels in the negative in X. So I'm sure you can guess what would happen if instead of negative 50, I just did a positive 50, so just 50. And then we previewed this. Now you can see my particle's start point has been pushed 50 pixels over to the right. So that's great and all, but what we don't want is all of the particles to show up in the exact same position every single time. We want to figure out a way to get some of these particles to show up in the negative 50, some of them to show up at 0, and some of them to show up at positive 50, and kind of all the points in between. So it looks like this whole platform is emitting particles. And that's actually easy to do with a behavior or a expression called random. So you'll notice that this box here has a little E here. What we want to do is we want to click on that, and we get this box that shows up. And inside this box, I'm going to first clear the 50 that we put in there, and then I'm going to click on function. And what I want to do is scroll down to the random function, and then I'm going to click on that. So double click to add it to this white box that we see up here. So instead of 50 or negative 50, what we want to do is we want to change this min and max. So we'll just put whatever values we want here so that our particles show up in that range. So we want our particles to show up anywhere from negative 50 to 50 pixels. And let's hit check mark. So you can see instead of just one number, we have that random function inserted, which is minus 50 and 50. So it means that our particles are going to show up anywhere from here to here. So let's test that out and see if that works. Perfect. So now we have our particles showing up, which looks a lot more natural, as if this portal is emitting these little white specks. Now, that's all we need to do to get some particles looking a little bit more interesting coming out of our portal, except for these white blocks are really quite boring. So let's make one more change to make that a little bit more interesting. And that's going to be over in this image tab that we see all the way in the right hand side of our particle behavior. So I'll click on image. And what you want to do is change the image. Now, earlier in the very first video, we imported all of our artwork. So if you did that properly, in this list, you'll see that we have an image called dust. So I'm just going to scroll down to that dust image, which I see right here. I'll click on that. And then now I'll preview my scene. And you can see instead of those little white blocks, we're actually working with these little dust particles. So a lot more interesting. So go ahead and take the time to set your portal up the way that I have here with some particles. And now that you've learned the random function, you know how to get those particles to spread across this platform. And then in the next video, we're going to learn how when our actor comes in contact with this portal, he's then beamed to a different location inside of our scene.